After 5 grueling years, I finally made the last payment on my bakery. The celebratory champagne was still fizzing when the bell above the door chimed. My brother Tyler stood there, flanked by our parents, clutching a folder of legal documents. "We're family, Clara. Family shares success," he announced, sliding papers across my counter. "Partnership agreement. 50% ownership transfer." My parents nodded approvingly. "This belongs to the family," Mom insisted. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't when I delivered the words that left my brother in tears. I grew up watching my parents fawn over my brother Tyler. While I scrounged for school supplies and saved babysitting money for clothes, my parents bought Tyler a car for his 16th birthday. When I asked for help with college applications, Mom told me they were setting aside money for Tyler's business school tuition. That was our family dynamic Tyler received, and I learned to provide for myself. Our house in Springfield wasn't large, but it always felt suffocating. My father worked as a bank manager, and my mother taught elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they always found extra for Tyler. When he crashed his car 3 months after getting it, they replaced it without hesitation. When I needed $30 for a field trip, I had to work for the neighbor walking dogs. Baking became my sanctuary when I was 12. My grandmother Agnes taught me to make her famous apple pie during a summer visit. The precision of measuring ingredients, the science of temperature and timing, it gave me control when everything else felt chaotic. Each success in the kitchen built confidence that my family constantly undermined. Tyler dropped out of college twice, and my parents covered his debts both times. When he decided to try his hand at real estate, they co-signed a loan for his first investment property. It sat vacant for 8 months before he sold it at a loss. When I graduated high school with honors, my celebration was a pizza dinner that my father complained cost too much. On my 18th birthday, I packed everything I owned into my rusty Civic. All I had was $237, a box of recipe cards from my grandmother who had passed away the year before, and a determination never to depend on anyone again. My mother seemed almost relieved to see me go. My father gave me a $20 bill and patted my shoulder awkwardly. Tyler didn't even come home for the occasion. The first months were brutal. I rented a room in a house with 4 other girls, all struggling students. During the day, I waitressed at a diner where the manager took $1 off my pay each time a customer complained, whether it was my fault or not. Evenings, I cleaned offices, and weekends, I worked catering gigs for a company that paid in cash and worked us like dogs. I applied to the culinary program at the community college, taking out loans no 18-year-old should have to consider. My focus was pastry arts, and I thrived despite my exhaustion. While my classmates complained about early morning classes, I was already up at 4:30 preparing breakfast at the diner before school. Professional kitchens weren't kind to women. My first pastry job after completing the program was at Bellini's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The executive chef, Dominic, would stand too close, breathing down my neck as I worked. "Pastry is delicate. Like women," he would say, his fingers brushing mine as he adjusted my piping technique. I endured because I needed the experience. The sous chef, Alan, was worse. He hid my tools, adjusted my oven temperatures when I wasn't looking, and claimed credit for my dessert specials with the owner. When I confronted him, he laughed. "Nobody's going to believe a little girl over me. I've been here 8 years." Everything changed when Elaine joined as the new general manager. She caught Alan sabotaging my chocolate soufflés before a VIP dinner and fired him on the spot. Later that night, after service, she sat with me in the empty restaurant. "You have real talent, Clara," she said, swirling her wine. "But talent isn't enough in this business. You need your own place where no one can take credit for your work or hold you back." "I can barely make rent," I laughed. "Opening a bakery requires capital I don't have." "So you save," she said simply. "Every penny, every day, and you plan." For the next 4 years, I lived like a monk. I worked under Chef Marcus, who paid less than I deserved, but taught me everything about running a kitchen efficiently. I took on additional weekend work at weddings and private events. I moved to a cheaper apartment in a questionable neighborhood and sold my car, taking the bus everywhere. Every spare dollar went into my bakery fund. By 24, I had saved $48,000. It wasn't enough, but when I saw the for lease sign on a dilapidated storefront on Maple Street, something just clicked. The neighborhood wasn't fashionable, mostly pawn shops and discount stores, but the rent was within reach, and the space had previously been a sandwich shop, so the basic infrastructure existed. I approached 6 banks with my business plan. 6 loan officers, all men, explained patiently why my concept wouldn't work. The location is problematic, one said. Another questioned whether I had the management capability at my age. One actually suggested I find a male business partner with more experience who could front the operation. The 7th place I tried was a local credit union. The loan officer, Diane, actually read my business plan. She asked tough questions about my projections, my marketing strategy, my contingency plans. After 2 meetings and a site visit, she approved a loan at 14% interest highway robbery, but my only option. The next 3 months were a blur of permits, inspections, and renovations. I did everything I could myself, painting walls until 3 in the morning, installing shelves, refurbishing display cases I bought secondhand. What I couldn't do myself, I bartered for. I designed a wedding cake for the electrician's daughter in exchange for rewiring the kitchen to code. I provided 6 months of pastries to the plumber's office for his work on the ancient pipes. Opening day was a disaster of epic proportions. The main oven decided to start fluctuating in temperature, burning one batch of croissants and undercooking the next. My flour supplier delivered all-purpose instead of bread flour. And to top it all off, a freak thunderstorm flooded the street, keeping all but the most determined customers away. I sold exactly $84 worth of baked goods that day, against $1,000 in overhead. I locked the door at closing time, sat on my kitchen floor, and cried for exactly 6 minutes. Then I got up, recalibrated the oven, called the flour supplier, and started prep for the next day. Slowly, I built a small but loyal customer base. Early morning commuters stopped for coffee and my signature morning buns. A few nearby businesses ordered cookie platters for meetings. The neighborhood mail carrier brought in her friends. After 2 months, I was breaking even, just barely covering costs and loan payments. That's when my landlord, Jerry, showed up with the news that would become the first real test of my business. "I'm raising the rent," he announced, not even bothering to sit down. "Starting next month." "That's not possible," I said, showing him our lease agreement. "We have a fixed rate for the first year." He smiled condescendingly. "There's a clause about market adjustments. This neighborhood is gentrifying, thanks to businesses like yours. The market has changed." I looked around at the empty storefronts on both sides of my bakery. Gentrifying? I'm the only new business on this block. "And you've made it so nice," he said, running his finger across my counter. "People are noticing. I've had other interested parties inquire about space. Unless you want competition right next door, you'll agree to the new terms." He slid a paper across the counter. My rent would double, effective in 30 days. My heart sank as I realized this could sink my barely floating business before it truly had a chance to swim. I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I couldn't afford the rent increase either. I spent 3 nights researching tenant rights and discovered the Springfield Small Business Association had a legal aid program. Their volunteer attorney, Janet, reviewed my lease and found Jerry's market adjustment clause was actually limited to a maximum 10% annual increase, not the 100% he was demanding. Janet drafted a letter citing the relevant lease sections and state tenant protection laws. Jerry backed down but made it clear he wasn't happy. "Don't expect any favors from me," he warned, as he left with his revised increase notice now just 9.5%, but still an additional $300 I hadn't budgeted for. To cover the increase, I took out a second mortgage on my tiny studio apartment. The payment stress kept me up at night, but during those sleepless hours, I developed a new recipe that would eventually help save the business, my sunrise swirl pastry. It was part croissant, part cinnamon roll, infused with orange zest and topped with a pink grapefruit glaze that hardened to a delicate shell. The first weekend I offered them, they sold out within 2 hours. By the following month, I had customers lining up before opening specifically asking for them. A local food blogger mentioned them. And suddenly, I had people driving from across town to try them. Just as business was picking up, the city announced a major infrastructure project. They would be replacing water and sewer lines on my entire block, with construction estimated to last 3 to 4 months. The day the barriers went up, blocking the sidewalk and parking spots in front of my store, my sales dropped 80%. Panic set in as I watched customers approach the construction, look confused, and turn away. By noon, I'd had exactly 2 sales. I couldn't survive 4 months of this. That night, I sat with my financial statements spread across my kitchen table, calculating how long I could stay open with minimal income. The answer was disturbing: less than 6 weeks. The next morning, I woke with an idea. If customers couldn't come to my bakery, perhaps my bakery could go to them. I designed a construction special flyer offering free delivery to businesses within a 1-mile radius for orders over $25. I spent my afternoon walking to every office building, salon, shop, and restaurant in the area, introducing myself and leaving flyers. The response was better than I could have hoped. By week's end, I had standing orders from 8 businesses. The accounting firm on 7th Street ordered breakfast pastries for their Monday meetings. The salon 3 blocks away wanted cookies for their clients every afternoon. I started arriving at 4 in the morning to bake, then spent 2 hours delivering before returning to manage the walk-in business that trickled through the construction. I was exhausted but surviving until the health department showed up. The inspector pointed to water stains on my ceiling, the result of the ancient plumbing in the apartment above my shop. "This is a violation," he explained. "You can't operate with potential contamination from above." I called Jerry immediately. "This is a building issue," I explained. "You need to fix the plumbing upstairs." "That's not in my budget this quarter," he replied. "You'll need to handle it or deal with being shut down." The repairs cost $4,300, money I absolutely did not have. I maxed out my last credit card and hired the plumber, who shook his head sympathetically as he worked. "Your landlord's a piece of work," he muttered. "These pipes should have been replaced years ago." The day after I reopened, following the health department's approval, I noticed a new sign being installed 2 blocks away. "Sweet Dreams Bakery," read the bright blue awning. A familiar figure stood directing the installation: Alan, the sous chef, who had sabotaged my work at Bellini's. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, but within a week, it became clear it was not. His menu featured items suspiciously similar to mine, including a morning twist that was a poor imitation of my sunrise swirl. His prices were set just below mine, and he had somehow obtained the email addresses of several of my regular customers, offering them opening specials. I later learned through industry gossip that Alan had been tracking my progress and nursing a grudge since Elaine had fired him. He'd been waiting for me to prove a bakery could succeed in this neighborhood before opening his competing business. The next month was the lowest point yet. With construction still blocking easy access to my shop and Alan actively poaching my customers, my sales plummeted. I reduced my staff hours to just myself, working 20 hours a day. I slept on a cot in my office to save time commuting. I ate nothing but damaged pastries that couldn't be sold. One particularly bad Tuesday, I made exactly $67 all day. After closing, I sat on my kitchen floor again, this time crying for much longer than 6 minutes. I was on the verge of calling my loan officer to discuss bankruptcy options when my phone chimed with a notification. A customer had tagged my bakery in a social media post. "Trekked through construction hell for these sunrise swirls at Clara's Bakery and would do it again tomorrow. Worth every effort. Number Desert Island Pastry. Number support small business. The post had already been shared dozens of times. Something clicked in my exhausted brain. I'd been trying to overcome my obstacles construction, competition, but what if I embraced them instead? What if I turned them into part of my story? The next morning, I took photos of myself delivering pastries while navigating the construction in rain boots and a hard hat borrowed from a friendly worker. I shared stories of the struggle to keep the bakery alive despite the challenges. I created a construction survivor punch card after 10 purchases. Customers received a free sunrise swirl and a branded hard hat cookie. People responded to the authenticity. My social following grew, and with it, my delivery orders increased. Several local food blogs picked up the story of the determined baker fighting through obstacles. One particularly influential blogger, Madison, wrote a piece titled "The Little Bakery That Could," highlighting not just my pastries but the perseverance behind them. In a world of corporate food chains, she wrote, Clara's Bakery reminds us what it means to build something real, one pastry at a time. Business was finally stabilizing. The construction was in its final phase, and my new marketing approach was working. Alan's Bakery, which had opened with a splash but delivered inferior products, was already seeing decreased traffic. I had just paid my loan on time for the third consecutive month and was allowing myself to breathe a little easier. Then came the water main break. It happened at 2 a.m. The aging infrastructure the city had been working to replace finally gave way completely, sending thousands of gallons of water rushing down the street. My bakery, situated at a slight depression in the road, took the brunt of it. The emergency alert woke me at my apartment, and I arrived to find water pouring through my front door. By dawn, the city had repaired the break, but the damage was catastrophic. My custom display cases, my carefully saved-for espresso machine, my industrial mixers all destroyed. The floor would need complete replacement, and the walls had absorbed water 3 feet up. The total damage, $43,000. I filed an insurance claim immediately, only to receive a denial letter 5 days later. The policy excluded acts of God, and apparently, a water main break qualified as divine intervention rather than municipal neglect. When I called the insurance company, the adjuster was sympathetic but firm. You could try suing the city, he suggested. But honestly, they'll claim immunity, and you'll waste money on legal fees. Standing in my destroyed bakery, surrounded by the ruins of 5 years of sacrifice and 18-hour days, I felt something inside me break. I had no more fight left. No more credit to max, no more loans to take, no more corners of my life to cut back on. I was finished. I spent that night in the bakery's back office, the only dry part of the building. I couldn't afford a hotel, and somehow going back to my apartment felt like admitting defeat. I lay on a makeshift bed of baking mats, scrolling through photos of what my bakery had been just 24 hours earlier. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a message from Madison, the food blogger. Just heard about what happened. This is beyond awful. What can the community do to help? I started typing nothing. It's over, but stopped. My fingers hovered over the screen. 5 years of fighting for this dream, and I was about to surrender it with a text message. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Clara, baking is just like life. Sometimes the oven runs hot, sometimes your ingredients aren't perfect, but you adjust and adapt. You never throw out the whole batch. I need to rebuild, I typed instead, but I don't have the resources. Madison's response was immediate. Let me make some calls. By noon the next day, Madison had organized a community fundraiser. Local restaurants offered to host bake sales featuring recipes I provided. 3 competing cafes donated their day's profits. A crowdfunding page went live, with a goal of $15,000, not enough to cover everything, but enough to begin repairs. The Springfield community responded with unexpected generosity. Regular customers shared stories of birthday cakes I'd made, breakfast pastries that had brightened difficult days, the time I'd stayed open late to provide emergency cupcakes for a forgotten school event. The daughter of the plumber I'd bartered with organized a benefit concert in the park. Within 2 weeks, the campaign raised $22,000. It wasn't the full $43,000 I needed, but it was enough to begin rebuilding. I took out another high-interest loan to cover the remainder, adding to my already substantial debt. But now I had something I hadn't had before, proof that what I'd built mattered to people beyond myself. I couldn't afford to rent another place during renovations, so I permanently moved into my back office, setting up a small hot plate and shower in the utility closet. For 3 months, I lived among construction dust and the constant noise of repairs. Every penny went into replacing equipment and rebuilding better than before. During this forced pause in operations, I experimented with new recipes. Inspired by the flood, I developed a deep blue sea cake blue velvet layers with waves of ombre buttercream and sugar glass water that sparkled under light. I posted progress photos online, building anticipation for the reopening. The renovation took twice as long as estimated and cost 30% more than budgeted. There were nights I lay awake calculating how many pastries I would need to sell each day for how many years to recoup these investments. The numbers were daunting, but I had come too far to stop now. Reopening day arrived 6 months after the flood. The line of customers stretched around the block. Madison covered the event for her blog, and 3 local news stations sent reporters. The mayor cut a ceremonial ribbon, saying something about the resilience of Springfield's small business community. The deep blue sea cake sold out within the first hour. By closing time, every shelf was empty, and my credit card machine had processed over $4,000 in sales, more than any previous day, by a factor of 4. I should have been ecstatic, but I was too exhausted to feel anything but numb relief. The momentum continued in the following weeks. A prominent food critic happened to visit while in town for another assignment. His review, published in a national food magazine, called my sunrise swirls worth a detour, and my deep blue sea cake an architectural and gastronomical achievement that larger establishments would envy. Suddenly, my one-woman operation couldn't keep up with demand. I was sleeping 3 hours a night, baking from midnight to noon, serving customers until closing, then starting prep for the next day. Something had to give, and if I didn't make changes, it would be my health. Hiring help was a terrifying prospect. My margins were still thin despite increased sales, and taking on the responsibility of someone else's livelihood felt overwhelming. But there was no alternative. I posted a simple "Help Wanted" sign and was surprised to receive 32 applications in 2 days. My first hire was Jamie, a culinary student with purple hair and multiple tattoos, who reminded me of myself 6 years earlier. Training someone to maintain my standards while allowing them enough autonomy to be effective was one of the hardest challenges yet. I had been working alone for so long that articulating my methods required developing an entirely new language. The first week with Jamie was rough. I hovered too much, criticized too quickly, and nearly lost her when I redid a batch of tarts she had prepared, because the fruit arrangement wasn't exactly as I would have done it. We had a frank conversation where she helped me see I needed to trust others if I wanted to grow. With Jamie handling morning baking, I could focus on special orders and developing new products. I hired a second assistant, Tomas, for counter service, and suddenly I had a staff people who depended on me for their livelihoods. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the relief of not doing everything alone. As business grew, I began eyeing the vacant storefront adjacent to my bakery. It had been empty for years, a former dry cleaner that had closed long before I arrived. Expanding would allow me to add seating, extend my menu to include lunch options, and create a dedicated space for special order consultations. The financial risk was significant. My existing loans were still far from paid off, and taking on additional debt could sink everything if my growth projections were too optimistic. I spent weeks refining my business plan, calculating break-even scenarios, and researching additional funding options. In the end, I approached Diane at the credit union again. She remembered me, and her first words were, "I read about you in Madison's blog. You've beaten every projection in your original business plan despite catastrophic setbacks." She approved the expansion loan at a much more reasonable 8% interest. Jerry, seeing the bakery's success, was suddenly eager to negotiate favorable terms for the adjacent space. Construction began on a doorway connecting the two storefronts, and I designed an expanded kitchen that would allow for greater production volume. While my retail business was growing, I also began developing wholesale accounts with local cafes. 3 coffee shops now carried my pastries, and a high-end grocery store had approached me about providing specialty cakes for their bakery section. These accounts provided reliable base income that helped smooth out the unpredictable nature of walk-in business. The Springfield Business Association nominated me for their Best New Business Award, new being a relative term since I was now in my 6th year of operation. The nomination brought additional publicity and a feature in the local newspaper. The reporter seemed particularly interested in my journey from homeless to business owner, though I corrected her that I had never been homeless, just extremely frugal and occasionally office-dwelling. The publicity caught the attention of Lily Anderson, a minor local celebrity who hosted a morning radio show. She ordered her wedding cake from my bakery, a 6-tier creation that I spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. When she posted photos to her 2 million social media followers, my online following tripled overnight, and I began receiving special order requests from surrounding states. For the first time since opening, I felt like I was building something sustainable. I still worked 12-hour days, but no longer 20. I had moved back into my apartment. I had reduced my original loan principal by almost 40%. The existential panic that had been my constant companion for years began to recede. That's when my family suddenly reappeared in my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon during a rare lull in customer traffic. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see 3 people I barely recognized. My mother's hair was now completely gray. My father had lost weight and gained wrinkles. My brother Tyler looked essentially the same, handsome, in that conventional way that had always opened doors for him, though now with designer clothes and an expensive watch. "Clara," my mother said, arms outstretched as if we'd seen each other last week instead of 7 years ago. "Your father and I were just telling Tyler we needed to come see this bakery we've been hearing about." I froze, piping bag in hand, utterly unprepared for this collision of my past and present. Jamie shot me a concerned look from behind the counter, sensing my tension. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed. "Can't family visit?" Tyler asked, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've been seeing your name everywhere lately. Thought it was time for a reunion." And just like that, my carefully constructed new life began to crack around the edges. The reunion was awkward at best. My parents acted as if our estrangement had been a minor scheduling conflict, rather than 7 years of complete silence. They wandered around my bakery, examining everything with curious eyes, while making comments that danced between compliments and subtle criticism. "Such interesting decor choices," my mother said, running her finger along the reclaimed wood shelving I had installed myself. "Very youthful." Tyler was particularly interested in the kitchen, peering through the swinging doors and asking pointed questions about my equipment. "These mixers must have cost a fortune," he commented. "Business must be good." When a customer came in asking about wedding cake consultations, my father jumped in before I could answer. "My daughter is quite the entrepreneur," he said proudly, as if he had contributed anything to my success. I scheduled a dinner with them that weekend, partly to get them out of my bakery, and partly because, despite everything, some small part of me still craved their approval. We met at a mid-range restaurant, nice enough to be special but not so expensive that it would strain my budget. "So tell us everything," my mother said, after ordering an appetizer that cost more than I usually spent on dinner for myself. "How did this all happen?" I gave them the abbreviated version of my journey, leaving out the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the times I'd had to choose between buying food and paying my electric bill, The constant struggle against a system that seemed designed to make small business owners fail. Even the sanitized version should have inspired some recognition of what I'd accomplished without their help. Instead, Tyler raised his glass in a toast to Clara's lucky break. Always knew you had a knack for baking. Lucky break? I echoed, unable to hide my disbelief. Well, yes, my mother interjected smoothly. Finding that location, getting those food bloggers to notice you. Some people struggle for years without getting such good fortune. My father nodded sagely. Location is everything in retail. You certainly fell into a good situation there. I wanted to tell them about the 6 banks that had rejected me, about repairing the ancient plumbing with my last credit card, about living in my office for months after the flood. Instead, I smiled tightly and changed the subject. How have you all been? The conversation shifted to their lives. My father had retired from the bank. My mother still taught but was considering retirement. And Tyler had been through a series of opportunities that somehow never quite materialized into actual success. I've been consulting, he explained vaguely, helping businesses identify growth strategies. As the evening wore on, I found myself monitoring their expressions, still instinctively seeking the approval I had never received. When my father mentioned he was proud of what I'd built, I felt a pathetic swell of satisfaction despite knowing it was unearned on his part. They insisted on a tour of my apartment after dinner, commenting on how cozy it was, code for small, and asking surprisingly detailed questions about my finances. Did I own or rent? What were property values in this neighborhood? Was I saving for retirement? Each question felt like an intrusion, but I answered politely, revealing more than I intended in my desire to prove myself successful in their eyes. I expected the dinner to be a one-time reconnection, but 3 days later, Tyler showed up at the bakery during our busiest morning rush. Just thought I'd stop by and see how things run during peak hours, he announced, coming behind the counter as if he belonged there. Customers stared as I gently directed him to the customer side, explaining health department regulations about unauthorized personnel in food preparation areas. He returned the following day with a notebook, sitting at a corner table for 4 hours, watching our operations and taking notes. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled broadly, just interested in the family business. It's not a family business, Tyler, I corrected. It's my business. He waved, dismissively. You know what I mean. We're family. This is a business. Same thing. My parents began visiting regularly as well, always during our busiest times. My mother would introduce herself to my staff as Clara's mom and begin asking them personal questions about their backgrounds and career goals. My father developed a habit of pointing out minor issues to customers, a smudge on a window, a slightly uneven table, always with the preamble. My daughter does her best, but a week after their initial visit, they invited themselves to my supplier meeting with a new organic flour vendor. They arrived early and were already deep in conversation with him when I arrived. We're so proud of what Clara's building, my mother was saying. The family has always been supportive of her dreams. I swallowed my objection and proceeded with the meeting, conscious of presenting a united front to the supplier. Afterward, Tyler peppered me with questions about my margins, my supplier contracts, and my pricing strategy. Each answer seemed to satisfy him in a way that made me increasingly uneasy. You've built a solid foundation here, he said, studying my daily sales records which he'd found on my office desk. With the right strategic vision, this could really expand. The frequency of their visits increased over the next few weeks. Tyler began bringing business associates to the bakery, introducing them to our baker and discussing future plans in vague terms that implied his involvement. My parents invited my key employees to dinner without consulting me, returning them with stories about my childhood and subtle suggestions that my staff keep an open mind about coming changes. Jamie approached me after one such dinner, concern evident in her expression. Clara, your brother told me he'd be taking a more active role in management soon. Is that true? Are you bringing him in as a partner? The question hit me like a physical blow. Absolutely not, I assured her. This is my business. I built it alone, and I'm not looking for partners. But the seed of doubt had been planted, not just with Jamie, but with all my staff. I noticed them watching Tyler when he visited, wondering if he would soon be their boss. My suppliers began addressing questions to him during meetings, despite my corrections. Even some regular customers started greeting him by name, asking about his involvement. The stress began affecting my work. For the first time since opening, I burned a batch of morning pastries because I was distracted by thoughts of my family's increasing presence. I found myself checking the door whenever the bell chimed, tensing when I saw them enter. My creativity suffered. I hadn't developed a new recipe in weeks. One afternoon, I stepped into the alley behind the bakery to take a brief break from the tension inside. Through the partially open back door, I heard Tyler's voice. He was on his phone, unaware of my presence. "No, trust me, it's a gold mine," he was saying. "She has no idea how to scale this properly. Once I secure my position, we can talk about those expansion opportunities we discussed." Yes, I'm working on getting in before she realizes what hit her. The family angle is working perfectly. She's so desperate for approval. She's sharing everything. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of his intentions. This wasn't about family reconnection at all. This was about Tyler finding his next opportunity, and that opportunity was my bakery. I confronted Tyler immediately, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. "I heard you," I said, stepping back into the bakery. "I heard everything you just said on the phone." His face registered shock for only a moment before smoothing into a practiced smile. "What are you talking about?" "The gold mine. Securing your position. Using the family angle to get information from me." Tyler laughed, shaking his head as if I'd said something ridiculous. "Clara, you're under so much stress running this place alone. You're imagining things." Before I could respond, my parents walked in. Perfect timing as always. "What's happening here?" my mother asked, looking between us. "Clara thinks I'm trying to steal her bakery or something equally insane," Tyler said, his tone making me sound paranoid. "I was on the phone with a friend discussing a completely different business opportunity." My father frowned. "Clara, you've always had this tendency to imagine the worst in people, especially family. It's why you ran away all those years ago." "I didn't run away," I said through gritted teeth. "I left because you made it clear I wasn't a priority." "See?" my mother sighed, turning to Tyler. "She's still so distrustful, after all we've done." The gaslighting was so blatant, it took my breath away. I had clear evidence of Tyler's intentions, yet somehow I was being made to feel like the unreasonable one. This had been their dynamic my entire life. Tyler could do no wrong, and my concerns were always dismissed as overreactions. I asked them to leave, and to my surprise, they complied without argument. But the next day, they returned with a new approach. "Family needs to stick together," my mother began, setting a homemade casserole on my counter, the same tuna noodle dish I had hated as a child. "We've been thinking about how hard you're working, Clara. It's not healthy. You need support," my father added. "That's what family provides." Tyler nodded solemnly. "I know we've had our differences, but at the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. We should be working together, not against each other." Their synchronized performance would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparent. They were laying the groundwork for what would come next, the pitch for Tyler's involvement in my business, under the guise of family loyalty. It came sooner than I expected. The following week, Tyler arrived with a man he introduced as Nate, a business colleague with expertise in family-owned operations. Nate presented a business card identifying him as a family business consultant, but a quick internet search during his bathroom break revealed his specialty was actually in helping family members gain ownership stakes in successful businesses started by relatives. "Every family business needs clear succession planning," Nate explained, spreading brochures across my office desk. "Without proper structure, these enterprises often falter during transitions." This isn't a family business, I repeated for what felt like the 100th time. And there's no transition happening. Tyler cleared his throat. Actually, Clara, I've been thinking about leaving my consulting practice to focus full-time on helping you grow the bakery. With my business background and your baking skills, we could really expand. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about Tyler wanting a piece of my success, he needed it. His vague consulting business was likely another failed venture, and he saw my bakery as his salvation. I declined his offer firmly but politely, citing my desire to maintain sole ownership. The meeting ended with tight smiles and promises to continue the conversation, despite my clear answer. The next day, I received a strange call from one of my suppliers. "I'm a bit confused," he said. "I got a call from someone claiming to be your family's business representative, asking about our contract terms and whether we could accommodate larger orders for franchise operations." Similar calls came from my landlord, my insurance agent, and 2 of my wholesale accounts. Tyler was systematically contacting everyone connected to my business, presenting himself as an authorized representative and gathering information I had never given him access to. The intrusion became even more blatant when Tyler approached Jamie again, this time with a proposition. When the management structure changes, he told her, "I'll be looking for a head baker. Clara will be focusing more on the business side. The position would come with a substantial raise." Jamie, to her credit, reported this to me immediately. "I don't want a promotion that undermines you," she said fiercely. "Whatever game your family is playing, I'm not interested." Her loyalty should have been comforting, but it only heightened my anxiety about what Tyler might be telling my other employees or business contacts. The bakery had become a battlefield, with my family deployed as undercover agents seeking to undermine my authority from within. The stress began manifesting physically. I developed insomnia, often lying awake replaying confrontations with my family and imagining worse ones to come. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. Panic attacks became a regular occurrence, striking without warning during quiet moments in the kitchen. One particularly difficult morning, after a night without sleep, I received a call from my bank. "Miss Thompson, we're calling to clarify some conflicting information. We received paperwork regarding a change in your business structure, but there seem to be discrepancies." My heart raced as the representative explained that someone had submitted documents suggesting a transition to a family partnership model. The bank had flagged it because the signatures didn't match their records. "I never submitted any such paperwork," I said, my voice shaking. "There are no changes to my business structure." After securing my accounts with additional verification requirements, I confronted my family during their next visit. Tyler denied any knowledge of the bank paperwork, expressing theatrical shock that someone would attempt such fraud. My parents suggested it might be a competitor trying to cause problems, perhaps Alan from Sweet Dreams Bakery. The gaslighting continued as my parents launched a new line of attack, now focusing on community perception. "People are beginning to talk," my mother said during an unannounced visit, "about how you've abandoned your struggling family despite your success." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "You're the ones who showed up here after 7 years of silence, only when my business started gaining recognition." "That's not how people will see it," my father replied smoothly. "They'll see a daughter who turned her back on family in need." "Is that the reputation you want for your bakery?" The threat was clear: comply with their demands, or they would damage my standing in the community I had worked so hard to build. It was manipulative and cruel, targeting the relationships I valued most. Tyler's next move was even more direct. During a routine health inspection, the inspector mentioned that a concerned citizen had reported possible code violations in my kitchen. Though the inspection found nothing, the implication was clear when Tyler later commented, "It's tough when regulations change so often. Hard for a small business to keep up." I spent the next week in hyper-vigilant mode, checking and rechecking every aspect of my operation for potential vulnerabilities my family might exploit. I installed security cameras, changed all my passwords, and instructed staff not to share any information with my family members. Just when I thought the situation couldn't become more stressful, I received a notification from my point-of-sale system about unusual access attempts. Someone had tried to log into my accounts multiple times. The IP address traced back to a coffee shop where Tyler frequently worked. I was in the middle of changing all my digital security when my family arrived for what would be their final ambush. The date was significant, exactly 5 years, and 1 day since I had signed the lease on my bakery. The day after I had made the final payment on my original loan. The bell chimed, and they entered as a unit, Tyler in front, my parents flanking him like supporting actors in his production. Tyler carried a manila folder. My mother clutched her purse with white knuckles. My father wore the same expression he had when disciplining me as a child. "Clara," Tyler began without preamble, "we need to talk about the future of this bakery." I closed early that day, flipping the sign to closed and asking my 2 employees to take the rest of the afternoon off. Whatever was about to happen, I didn't want an audience. We gathered in my small conference room, really just a corner of the expanded space with a table that normally hosted cake consultations. Tyler placed the folder in the center of the table with the theatrical flourish of a magician revealing a trick. "We've prepared some documents that will formalize our family's involvement in the bakery," he announced. "A partnership agreement that grants me 50% ownership, with Mom and Dad serving as an advisory board." I stared at him, wondering if this was some elaborate joke. "Why would I sign over half my business to you?" My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "Clara, honey, family businesses belong to the whole family. That's how it works." "This isn't a family business," I said for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I built this alone. You weren't there when I was working 3 jobs to save startup capital. You weren't there when I was painting these walls at 3 in the morning. You weren't there when the flood destroyed everything I had built." "That's not entirely true," my father interjected. "We've always been there in spirit. We're your foundation, Clara." The absurdity of this statement might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so serious. Tyler pushed the folder toward me, opening it to reveal legal documents drawn up with far more detail than I would have expected. This wasn't an impulsive proposal. They had been planning this for weeks, possibly months. "I've developed a business strategy for regional expansion," Tyler explained. "With my business school background and connections, we could open 3 more locations within 18 months. But I need skin in the game to fully commit." "Business school background?" I repeated. "You dropped out twice." He waved dismissively. "I completed the essential courses. The degree is just a formality." I flipped through the documents, noting with growing alarm the extensive control Tyler would have under this arrangement. He would manage all financial aspects while I would be relegated to production oversight, essentially becoming a baker in my own bakery. "This is insulting," I said, closing the folder. "I won't sign this." Tyler's friendly demeanor hardened slightly. "Clara, be reasonable. This neighborhood is becoming much more upscale thanks to your efforts. Commercial rent will skyrocket when your lease renews. Do you have the capital to sustain that?" It was a good question, and one that had kept me awake many nights. My lease would come up for renewal in 8 months, and I was already saving for the inevitable increase. But I wasn't about to admit this vulnerability to Tyler. "I'll manage, as I always have." My mother sighed dramatically. "The community has embraced you as one of Springfield's success stories. How do you think they'd react if they knew you abandoned your struggling family? Your brother has had such a difficult time finding his path." "Are you threatening me with public opinion?" I asked incredulously. "Not threatening," my father corrected. "Just pointing out potential consequences. People value family loyalty." The implied blackmail was as transparent as it was despicable. They would paint me as the villain, the selfish daughter who refused to help her family despite her success. In a community-oriented town like Springfield, such a narrative could damage the relationships I had worked years to build. Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You know, health department regulations are getting stricter, every year. It would be a shame if someone noticed how you sometimes use the back room for storage without the proper ventilation upgrades. I froze. It was a minor violation I'd been meaning to address, but the immediate threat was clear. Are you threatening to report me to the health department if I don't sign? Of course not, he smiled. I'm just concerned about compliance. As a partner, I could help ensure everything is up to code. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly 2 hours, veiled threats alternating with appeals to family loyalty, guilt over their supposed struggles, and reminders of how they had supported me. Each time I refused, they adjusted their approach, finding new pressure points to target. You know, Tyler said eventually, his patience visibly wearing thin, I gave you the idea for this bakery years ago. Remember? That conversation at Christmas when I said, you should sell your cookies commercially? I stared at him in disbelief. I had left home at 18. There had been no such conversation. This was an outright fabrication, yet he delivered it with such confidence that for a moment, I almost questioned my own memory. That never happened, Tyler. Mom and Dad both remember it, he insisted. My parents nodded in synchronized agreement. I've been part of this from the beginning, Clara. I'm just asking for formal recognition of that fact. I stood up, my decision made. I think we're done here. I won't be signing anything. Tyler's expression darkened. You always were stubborn. We're trying to help you, but you're too proud to see it. This meeting is over, I said, moving toward the door. You'll regret this, my father warned, as they gathered their belongings. Family is forever, Clara. You can't escape that. I watched them leave, a curious sense of calm replacing the anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. They had finally shown their true intentions, stripped of pretense. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, I called Angela Rivers, an attorney I had consulted during the flood insurance dispute. I explained the situation, including the veiled threats and manipulation tactics. This is unfortunately common with family businesses, Angela sighed. Though in your case, it's particularly egregious since they had no part in building the company. What can I do? I asked. Document everything, she advised. Every conversation, every visit, every unusual circumstance that might be connected to their efforts. And secure your business legally. Over the next week, I followed her advice meticulously. I installed additional security cameras, backed up all my business records off-site, and alerted my staff to report any contact from my family immediately. I changed the locks on the bakery doors and added password protection to my computer systems. I was preparing for battle, but I didn't expect my family to escalate quite so quickly. 8 days after rejecting their partnership proposal, I received notice of a legal action filed against my bakery. Tyler was claiming he had a verbal partnership agreement with me dating back to the bakery's inception. He alleged that he had provided essential conceptual and strategic input during the planning stages and had been promised a formal stake once the business became profitable. It was completely fabricated, but crafted just plausibly enough that a court would need to investigate. The immediate consequence was a temporary freeze on my business accounts, pending initial judicial review. Without access to my accounts, I couldn't pay suppliers, process payroll, or cover ongoing expenses. It was a calculated move designed to create maximum pressure in minimum time. Tyler likely hoped I would capitulate rather than fight a prolonged legal battle I might not be able to afford. Angela reassured me that his case was weak, but warned that legal proceedings could drag on for months. He's betting you'll settle to end the financial strain quickly, she explained. Then he's miscalculated, I replied, a cold determination replacing my earlier anxiety. I didn't survive everything else just to hand my bakery over now. With Angela's guidance, I filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation. While we prepared our legal response, I had to find a way to keep the bakery operating with frozen accounts. My staff rallied around me in ways I never could have anticipated. Jamie offered her personal savings to cover supply costs. Tomas worked for IOUs rather than immediate payment. My flour supplier, upon hearing about the situation, extended unusual credit terms. Madison organized another community fundraiser, this time specifically to support legal expenses. Through it all, I remained eerily calm. The constant stress of the past months had burned away all my uncertainty, leaving only resolute determination. This was my bakery. I had built it from nothing. No one, not even family, had the right to take it from me. While gathering documentation for our case, I discovered something unexpected. In reviewing old communications with suppliers, I found an email from an account I didn't recognize, but signed with my name. The message requested changes to delivery schedules and included a scanned signature that, while similar to mine, showed subtle differences. Further investigation revealed several such communications, all sent during periods when my family had been visiting regularly. Among my mother's many talents was an uncanny ability to mimic handwriting, a skill she had used during my childhood to sign permission slips and report cards without scrutiny. I also uncovered evidence that Tyler had approached my primary competitor, Alan at Sweet Dreams Bakery, with an offer to sell him my recipes and customer list after gaining control of my business. The betrayal went even deeper than I had imagined. Tyler didn't want to run a bakery. He wanted to strip mine for parts and move on to his next opportunity. Angela added these findings to our growing case file. "We need to present all this evidence directly to your family," she advised. Sometimes seeing the weight of evidence against them convinces people to withdraw before formal proceedings. We scheduled a meeting at Angela's office. I spent the night before reviewing everything we had, compiled a comprehensive history of my solo journey building the bakery, testimonials from everyone who had helped along the way, evidence of my family's manipulation and fraud attempts, and documentation of Tyler's true intentions. As I organized these materials, I felt something shift inside me. The little girl desperately seeking parental approval had finally grown up. I no longer needed their validation. I had built something valuable entirely without them, and their current interest was about exploitation, not love. The next morning, my family arrived at Angela's office with their own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Jeffrey Barnes. They seemed surprised by my calm demeanor, perhaps expecting the emotional, easily manipulated daughter they remembered. "Before we begin formal discussions," Angela said, "Clara would like to address the room." I stood, facing the people who shared my blood but had never truly been my family. "For 5 years, I built my bakery without any help or even acknowledgement from any of you," I began, my voice steady. "I worked 18-hour days. I lived in my office when I couldn't afford rent. I survived floods, competitors, construction, and countless other challenges that would have destroyed most businesses. I placed photographs on the table, images of the original dilapidated storefront, me painting walls alone at midnight, the flood-damaged kitchen, the gradual rebuilding. At no point during those 5 years did any of you call, visit, or express interest in my life. You reappeared exactly 1 day after I made the final payment on my initial business loan. Your timing wasn't coincidental." Tyler started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I have documentation proving multiple instances of fraud, including forged signatures, unauthorized communications with my suppliers, and attempts to access my business accounts without permission. I have recordings of Tyler threatening regulatory action if I didn't comply with his demands. And I have evidence of his plan to sell my recipes and customer information to my primary competitor after gaining control of my business." I laid out each piece of evidence methodically. My mother's face paled as I presented the forged signatures. My father looked increasingly uncomfortable as the recording of his veiled threats played. Tyler maintained his confident expression, but I noticed a slight twitch in his jaw, a childhood tell that always emerged when he was cornered. "Here's what happens next," I continued. "You will withdraw all claims against me and my bakery immediately. You will sign legally binding agreements never to attempt contact with me, my employees, or any entity connected to my business again. In return, I won't pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and blackmail. Jeffrey Barnes began a blustering response about family misunderstandings and good faith negotiations, but Angela silenced him with a single raised eyebrow. My client has been exceedingly generous in her offer, she said. The evidence here would support not only the dismissal of your client's claims, but potentially criminal prosecution. I suggest you review these materials carefully before responding. We left them to examine the evidence, waiting in an adjacent conference room. 30 minutes later, Jeffrey requested to speak with Angela alone. When she returned, she was smiling slightly. They'll sign the agreements, she reported. The claim will be withdrawn by tomorrow morning, and your accounts should be unfrozen within 48 hours. When we returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Jeffrey was already packing his briefcase. My father sat staring at his hands. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, always the victim even now. Tyler was the only one who met my gaze, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "You've changed," he said quietly. "No," I corrected him. "I grew up. There's a difference." As they prepared to leave, Tyler paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth, you built something impressive. I underestimated you." The words that had once been all I wanted from my family now meant nothing. "Yes," I agreed. "You did." As he turned to go, I saw something I never expected: tears in Tyler's eyes. Not from remorse or love, but from the realization of what he had lost. Not just a bakery he could exploit, but a sister who had become stronger than anyone had anticipated. The family I had been born into walked out of my life that day. I never saw them again. The court formally dismissed my family's claim 3 days later with prejudice, meaning they could never refile the same claim. The judge ordered them to pay my legal fees, a small victory that nevertheless felt significant. My accounts were unfrozen, and business operations returned to normal, or rather, a new normal, because nothing was quite the same after what had happened. The experience had changed me fundamentally. The lingering need for family approval that had unconsciously influenced so many of my decisions was gone. In its place was a clear-eyed confidence I had never fully possessed before. With the threat removed, I implemented permanent security measures to protect what I had built. I restructured my business legally, creating an ironclad operating agreement that clarified ownership and succession planning. I upgraded security systems, improved record-keeping protocols, and established clear boundaries with everyone in my professional life. Strangely, the entire ordeal had raised my bakery's profile in the community. Word had spread about my family's attempted takeover, transforming into a David versus Goliath narrative that resonated with Springfield's small business supporters. The local girl who built a bakery from nothing and defended it against all odds became a story people connected with. Sales increased 30% in the month following the legal resolution. I received invitations to speak at business association meetings, mentor young entrepreneurs through the community college, and consult with other small business owners facing similar challenges. With the increased revenue, I was able to give Jamie and Tomas substantial raises and hire 2 additional staff members. I created an emergency fund large enough to cover 6 months of operating expenses, a security buffer I had always dreamed of but never managed to accumulate. The experience also changed how I viewed my role as an employer. Having felt the vulnerability of being undervalued and exploited, I became passionate about creating a workplace where everyone felt secure and appreciated. I implemented profit sharing, flexible scheduling, and professional development opportunities, the things I had wished for during my early career. 6 months after the legal battle ended, an unexpected opportunity arose. A prime retail location in downtown Springfield, a spot I could never have afforded during my early years, became available when a national chain closed its local outlet. The property manager contacted me directly, offering favorable lease terms because, as she explained, we want local success stories, not more faceless corporations. After careful financial analysis, I decided to take the risk. The downtown location would become my flagship store, while the original bakery would transform into a production kitchen and training facility. I called it a leap of faith, but it wasn't really. It was a calculated decision based on 5 years of proven resilience and growing demand. The expansion required additional financing, but this time, banks competed for my business. My loan officer, a young woman who reminded me of myself 6 years earlier, offered terms I could scarcely have imagined during my early struggles. "Your business history is impressive," she said, reviewing my application, "particularly your adaptability during multiple crises. That's what we look for, not just success, but proven resilience." The downtown location opened exactly 1 year after I had made the final payment on my original loan. The line of customers stretched around the block, reminiscent of my post-flood reopening but without the underlying financial anxiety. This time, I could enjoy the moment fully. The new space featured a glass-walled kitchen where customers could watch pastry creation in real time, comfortable seating for those who wanted to linger, and a special consultation room for custom orders. I named it From Nothing, embracing the journey that had brought me here. At the grand opening, Madison interviewed me for her now nationally syndicated food blog. Looking back, she asked, "What would you tell other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges?" I considered the question carefully, thinking of all the young business people who might be struggling as I once had. "Build something authentic," I finally answered, "something that truly belongs to you. Success isn't just financial. It's creating something meaningful that represents your values and vision." And when challenges come, because they always will, remember that resilience isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up. As the interview concluded, I looked around at what I had created, not just a bakery, but a community. Jamie had developed into an exceptional head baker, now training our newest team members with the same patience she had shown me. Thomas managed front-of-house operations with warmth and efficiency. Regular customers greeted each other by name, forming friendships that extended beyond our walls. This, I realized, was the true family I had built, not one connected by blood, but by shared values and mutual respect. 3 years after the family confrontation, Springfield Business Association named From Nothing Bakery the Business of the Year. Standing at the podium accepting the award, I reflected on the journey that had brought me there, from a rundown storefront with a second-hand oven to a thriving enterprise with 2 locations and 15 employees. Success is rarely a straight line, I told the audience. It's a series of challenges overcome, lessons learned, and relationships built. The most important ingredient isn't capital or connections, it's persistence. The following week, I launched a mentorship program specifically for young women entrepreneurs facing the barriers I had encountered. The From Nothing Foundation provided microloans, business guidance, and moral support to those starting with limited resources but unlimited determination. My first mentee was a 20-year-old single mother with a talent for web design and no formal business training. Watching her navigate early challenges with my support gave me a sense of purpose beyond my own success. When she landed her first major client, her joy became mine as well. 5 years to the day after opening my first bakery, I stood in my downtown kitchen before opening hours, taking a rare moment of solitude. The scent of fresh bread filled the air, morning light streamed through the windows, and the quiet hum of mixers created a soundtrack I had come to love. In that moment of reflection, I realized something profound. The bakery I had fought so hard to build and protect wasn't just a business, it was physical proof that believing in yourself when no one else does isn't delusion. It's the first step toward creating something meaningful. The journey from nothing to something had changed me in ways I never anticipated. The hardships hadn't broken me. They had forged me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than I ever could have become without them. The betrayals had taught me to value authentic relationships. The struggles had given me perspective no amount of easy success could provide. I had built my bakery from nothing, defended it against those who tried to claim it, and transformed it into something greater than I had initially imagined. But the most important transformation wasn't in the business, it was in me. Have you ever had to fight for something you built from scratch? Maybe it wasn't a business, but something else that was truly yours, a relationship, a career, a creative project, or even your sense of self-worth? I'd love to hear your stories of persistence and triumph in the comments below. And if you found inspiration in my journey, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need encouragement today. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful things are built from nothing.